Hey everyone, welcome to the GTM News Show. I got Balaji here today. Hey Balaji, how you doing?
What's going on, Taylor? GTM News. Mama, I made it.
I love it. Music to my ears. I appreciate that. Appreciate the compliment. Well, thanks for coming on. I've been following your content online, and we both have. I think we're both fans of Anthony Kanata, Audience
Yes.
Plus, and his movement with owned media. I had him on earlier this year, and so I kind of
Yeah.
wanted to do like almost like a part two or just an extension of that, go a little bit deeper into building an audience. You have a
Mm.
bunch of great content on LinkedIn about building an audience. Why is it important? And kind of this
Mm-hmm.
new era we are in when in regards to B2B go to market, B2B growth,
Yeah.
the predictable revenue model, outbound, even inbound has been challenged. In my opinion, just because of so much saturation. You know, everyone's doing blogging,
Yes.
everyone's doing the typical nurture
Yes.
funnel, everyone's doing lead gen, everyone's doing outbound.
Very
So
true.
I'd love to hear from you, just kind of high level. Um, what's your thoughts on how do we combat that? And yeah, just
Mm.
kind of run me down your whole idea as far as building an audience and how do we combat kind of the old ways that are really not working as well as they used to.
Yeah, yeah, goodness. This is such a fun topic to talk about. Honestly, it ends up being like a therapy session for us B2B marketers like yourself. I've been Taylor in B2B SaaS for over a decade, probably like a decade and a half. And I've gotten to see the market evolve. The interesting thing about, I think one's mindset, the way you approach, the way you think about your career really is important because a lot of the tried and true, a lot of the proven formulas don't necessarily work anymore. And so if you're someone who is sort of dogmatic about your marketing principles, your marketing beliefs, you might find this challenging. There's a caveat to that. There are some principles, so people will often refer to them as first principles, that tend to stand the test of time a little bit better. They're a bit more timeless. But a lot of the more recent tactical things, especially related to technology that's underpinning those tactics, those will come and go. So I started out story time. I'm a
Sweet.
storyteller. I used to write kids books. So I'm always up
Fun.
for telling a story. So back in the day, Taylor, once upon a time, I was working at Red Hat, an open source, probably the largest open source company. They make a Linux, their version of Linux. They distribute a version of Linux, and I was a young MBA charged with implementing their first instance of Eloqua. That's one of the very first marketing automation tools that was
Hmm.
out there. This was 2005, I think. So this is the dawn of marketing automation. It was heady times. Marketers were finally going to be able to justify their seat at the table. That no longer, Taylor, would we be called the pretty picture department, right?
Hmm.
So this was nice. This was empowering. So I was doing things like building lead scoring models and email lead nurturing sequences, and goodness, we were getting all these great results. Back then, Taylor, you would send out an email, you get 90% open rates. It was like everybody read their emails. It's like you're getting a message from your mom. It's like, "Dear Taylor, it's the 28th day of September." And you're reading the whole thing. But as you pointed out, several things shifted underneath our feet to completely change the results that we're getting and to change the experience for B2B buyers.
Hmm.
So let's geek out about some of them real quick.
Sweet.
One of the ones I just talked about was the birth of marketing automation. That was around 2005, the mid 2000s, I think. So Eloqua, Pardot, Marketo, a lot of these names will sound familiar to our fellow marketers. Those sprung up. But that was on the marketing side. On the sales side, Taylor, you utter two words. This is almost like saying Voldemort out loud. You said predictable revenue. I gotta take you to task for saying the words out loud, man. It's like saying Candyman three times. So for those who maybe are not familiar, Predictable Revenue is this book that was published by Aaron Ross. I think he was the VP of sales or the head of sales at Salesforce. He published this book in 2011. And it chronicled the story of how he and his sales organization were able to bring in $100 million of, wait for it, recurring revenue for Salesforce. It basically laid out his model. And of course, Silicon Valley flipped out over this. Overnight, this became the sales Bible for Silicon Valley. So a lot of the way that B2B marketing and B2B sales teams operate together today is based on predictable revenue. And predictable revenue, let's be fair, let's be honest, it's made a lot of tech companies a lot of money. But along the way, it's also burned, in my opinion, a lot of bridges. It's created a lot of really unfavorable and unpleasant buying experiences. For comparison, Taylor, have you ever sat through a timeshare presentation?
I haven't, but I've seen the videos online, and yeah, I've heard the
gotta
horror
do it.
stories.
You got to do it at least once in your life. You got to do
Okay.
it, Taylor.
Especially
It's
as a
an
marketer, it'd probably be interesting. I'm sure I could learn something from it. Just
I think so.
the psychological warfare they commit during the
You
presentation.
hit the nail on the head. Psychological warfare. I love how you characterize that. You should get one of those like hidden cameras on your shirt.
Yeah.
Like that would be
Undercover
great content.
timeshare.
I'm telling you, that could be a show actually, now that we
Yeah.
think about it. But yeah, they're very, very big pressure sales. A lot of times the products do look compelling, right? They show you these beautiful beaches, palm trees, cabanas, and it looks great. It's not that the product is faulty, but the sales process is challenging. A lot of times they're selling to people who are not in a buying cycle, who had no intent of purchasing this $30,000 product. They just wanted the free buffet that was promised at the end. And a lot of B2B sales, a lot of predictable revenue sales ends up looking this way. They might incentivize or coerce people into getting onto these calls, and then they berate them, they badger them with follow-up emails, follow-up calls, incentives until they hopefully cross that finish line. Maybe it works for 1% of the people that they badger. How do you think the remaining 99% of the people that went through that same process and never bought, how do you think they felt about that brand? Maybe not so favorably. And so predictable revenue continues to be almost the rule of law today, but buyers are revolting against it. And now, in the past like 2-3 years, they're way more empowered because of things like, you might have heard the term dark social. We could phrase it differently. It's Slack groups, it's communities, it's meetups, it's me being able to meet Taylor in conversations like this on Zoom or on Riverside and just pick each other's brain. Now, instead of buyers going to Google as their first stop and then going to the brand website, signing up for a demo, doing that with 5 different brands, and taking what the salespeople say as the rule of law, I just called Taylor up. Like, hey, Taylor, I'm starting a podcast. You know, I'm trying to figure out what provider to use. Who would you recommend? Taylor's like, oh, dude, I've been using Riverside for the past 9 months. I love it because of this reason, that reason. Taylor's got no dog in the fight. He's not receiving an affiliate commission. I trust Taylor. We have a relationship. That's way more trustworthy than going to the vendor's website, because every vendor is going to show off their strengths and cover their warts. And so buyers have just learned. We've adapted. We've evolved. So predictable revenue is still a thing, but I think predictably buyers are revolting against that, and they want to own more of the buyer journey themselves.
Thank you for framing that. Super cool. And before we jump into the solution maybe to this problem, kind of just recapping. So for outbound predictable revenue, what's so interesting is I still see, AEs, SDRs, BDRs at like name brand companies showing the success of their outbound strategies. And even Salesforce, like they were the ones that pioneered going to the cloud. So of course, when you send an email, when you call somebody, when you reach out to them, I'm like, oh man, Salesforce. I know I've heard of Salesforce. I've heard of their name. Like they have so much what we call as marketers brand awareness.
That's
And
it.
so much of like even outbound, I wonder like and there's no way you could ever figure this out because once again, part of marketing is so hard to attribute, so hard. You can't get inside somebody's head and understand exactly how they came to a buying decision or reached out. But if you could figure out like, you know, especially for these like Salesforce, for example, how much brand awareness they have and just how much, you know, when you reach out, it's like, well, you know, how much of a successful outbound is actually because of brand awareness.
Because of brand awareness,
nothing to do with the tactics of outbound. Outbound was just a way of getting in front of somebody and causing them, you know, another touch point essentially. So I think about that a lot now, especially with the companies I work with and consult with. It's just it's so much around that brand awareness that really helps with that. And then with the marketing automation, kind of with inbound, right? That with that whole world, we saw this. Well, first, I think you said it earlier, like buyers know they know they've seen the patterns, right? And we're trained. Our defense mechanism is to see patterns, right, into defense, and to, you know, to have a defense against those patterns, and so to be nurtured, which I think you put some notes in of like nurturing friends don't nurture friends or something like that, which I love that idea. But just that whole world, we can smell it from a mile away, right? We know when we're filling out that ebook. We know that probably a salesperson is going to call us, and so we're automatically, you know, responding like don't answer or don't respond to the emails or whatever. And so, saturation in general, and then also I think I don't hear this enough as well. There's a million and one ways to solve a problem now, especially since the pandemic. I actually was working for a tech company that was a local tech company, service provider, and during the pandemic, because of remote work, they were able to go national. They're able to service people remotely. So because of globalization, number one, we have an international market where if you're like a service provider, you can get anyone. Like I don't even know where you are right now. You could be it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter where we are because we're all in the cloud working together, right? So on service providers, it doesn't matter where you are in so many ways. And then on the other end, software. There's like every day I find a new piece of software and I'm like, that's kind of cool. Add it to my list, and I'm like, I have no possible way to filter and analyze which software is appropriate, which one should I use. And so back to your point, we're going back to the good old days. Like my dad is a financial advisor, and I worked for him for a couple of years, and it was all about referrals and getting building and networking, referrals, building strategic partners to and all those things. It's so funny because we're going back to like the good old days of like, you got to build those relationships. And I think technology helps you do it at scale, and you can do it much more efficiently and stuff like that, which is cool. But it's weird. It's a weird world that we're going back to that. And but I think So I think this processing myself, and thank you for bringing up those awesome points. I'd love to kind of any additional thoughts you'd like to throw in there before we switch over into how can folks better position themselves moving forward?
Man, you gave some really good examples, and I would just add, Taylor, that I suspect the methods that your dad has been using to grow his business and the methods that we see as old school maybe never went away. Maybe we just added all this technology on top of those methods to scale, but those methods still fundamentally, I get the feeling that some of the most successful salespeople probably still build relationships, do a lot of networking, give out a lot of value in different communities, and then over time, they have people come back to them. So I think those methods generally are timeless. It might be worth highlighting that I did a lot of my marketing under the Department of Demand Generation. And even the term demand generation sometimes could be controversial because if you think about it, it's very difficult for us to generate demand where a company otherwise is not ready to demand your product. So you could almost think of the components of demand. There's this old sales formula called BANT, B-A-N-T. It's an acronym. It was recently updated they added one more letter and they changed the B to an F, so faint. So let me tell you what FAINT stands for. The F is funds. These are the components of demand. The F is funds. Does a prospect have the funds to buy your product? Either they do or they don't. If they don't, you can't magically make them have the funds. The A in FAINT is authority. Are you talking to a person who has authority? Okay, we understand that one. The I is interest. Are they interested in your potential solution, your solution category? That may be the one area where marketers and salespeople are able to exert some influence, getting them interested. Okay, then the N is need. Do they have a need for your product or not? It's either a yes or a no, regardless of how good your copy is and how eloquent your sales person is. And then finally, the T is timeline. Do they actually have a timeline where they're saying, okay, by this particular date, we need to have a solution? A lot of those elements of demand, we're not actually able to influence from the outside. We could influence their interest, maybe influence the timeline a little bit, but apart from that, we have limited impact. What that suggests to me, my interpretation, Taylor, is that one, for companies who already have demand and they're in a buying cycle, hopefully we're top of mind for them already. Like the Salesforce example you gave with the Salesforce SDRs making outbound calls, folks are probably picking up those calls like, oh yeah, I love Salesforce, or I know Salesforce, or I know someone who uses Salesforce. A lot of that brand awareness was already done ahead of time. So when people enter a buying cycle, hopefully you've already done your homework so they know who you are and they're going to take your call. But Taylor, only maybe 1 to 5% of prospects in any market are in a buying cycle. The remaining 95%, that's a massive percentage. The remaining 95% are not ready to buy today. Unfortunately, most companies either ignore those people or nurture them. And, you know, again, we could talk about nurture experiences and how pleasurable those are.
Thanks for. I didn't know BANT changed to
FAINT.
To FAINT. I wonder if there's some sort of analogy there with FAINT. I don't know. We won't go there. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I'll have to look that up more. And that's fascinating. Yeah, I think as far as the studies go, I think it was Forrester that came out with that study of under 5% of your total addressable markets in a buying stage, and all the stats of 85 to 90% of the buyer's journey happens before you even get to sales. So all these things, right? Like whether it's dark social people are finding different ways or new old ways to connect. Right. And even going one step further on the Salesforce analogy, I love looking at public SaaS companies' disclosures, their financial disclosures. Very fascinating because you can learn, mostly around what they spend on marketing and sales, and they have to be really transparent. Like S1s, so S1s for companies that are about to go public.
Yes.
Really interesting because they disclose everything, and they have to disclose all the negatives from their go-to-market strategy, all the positives. So you can learn a lot. I did Klaviyo. I actually did an episode on the show about Klaviyo, and I did a deep dive into kind of their go-to-market strategy. Some really cool findings.
Incredible.
At Salesforce, I love looking at their numbers because so they do, it's like $20 billion a year in revenue, right? They're one of the most successful B2B SaaS companies, right? And what they spend on marketing and sales is just fascinating because that's the other component we're talking about here, that there is this, it's just the amount of brand awareness, the marketing they're doing, the conferences, the whatever. They spend, in 2022, they were spending, the end of 2022, they were spending 45% of their total revenue on marketing and sales. So they were spending close to $10 billion a year on marketing and sales. And you're laughing, right? Because any company I work with, whether it's a small SaaS company or any B2B company, first of all, there's no B2C company that ever spends that much money on marketing and sales. There's no possible way. Any name brand company, they usually spend 5, 10, 15% on marketing and sales. because their margins aren't there, right? That's why SaaS is so
That's a
popular
good
and so
point.
effective.
That's
'Cause
right.
their
That's
margins,
right.
right? They can just dump a ton into
That's
into
right.
marketing and sales. But so this company, right, that has like probably the best brand awareness of any B2B company I know of, still spends, 45. They've gone down to like 38% this year because of cutbacks and stuff like that.
Yes. Yes.
But even still, once again, this kind of putting all these things in perspective of like, they still are investing so much into growth. That's just to get new logos, right? Not even to service their clients or whatnot.
Incredible.
So just another kind of tidbit I always find super fascinating of like keeping that in perspective of like, you can do predictable revenue, but are you willing to spend 45% of your revenue at a $20 billion company? Are you willing to spend that much money to continue? And of course, they don't just do predictable revenue; they do brand awareness. They have Dreamforce. They have these epic, epic marketing initiatives. So, anywho, I thought it'd be an interesting tidbit to throw out. I'd love to hear. We could probably talk for another hour, but I want to be respectful of your time. I'd love to hear we've kind of hinted at a little bit about like communities,
yes,
building an audience. We mentioned at the beginning. Let's talk about building an audience and what have you seen work really well? Why is this strategy, creating owned media audience, really effective? Maybe starting from the buyer's perspective, right? Like, why do buyers want that? And then from the company's perspective, how does it work as a way to grow your business and get more customers?
Right. Yeah. So I love that framing, Taylor. A lot of what us B2B marketers used to do or have been doing as part of the marketing automation wave was to try to capture an email address, often by giving up an ebook or something else of value. And then once we've got that email address, we've got them in our universe. Sometimes we might send them to a salesperson, which isn't a great experience, but let's say they go to sales, they come back like, okay, this person's not ready. You got to nurture them. All right. Now marketing is like, okay, let's put on our nurture hat. Our first line of attack usually is an email nurture sequence, but those have a number of challenges. They get outdated fairly easily. So if you've done B2B marketing for any length of time, you've probably been charged at some point with updating the email nurture sequence. And usually it's low down on the list of priorities. So you end up having people maybe who aren't writers. You might have marketing operators going in, updating the email sequence. And so the quality tends to slip. Inboxes have also become really, really crowded. So even though you've got that email address, consider that email nurture, it's different from a newsletter subscription. A newsletter subscription says, Taylor's company, GTM News, offers this specific value on this specific cadence. I like it. I want some more of it. I'm going to sign up. And email nurture is like, hey, Taylor, we met at this networking event 3 months ago, so I'm going to randomly come to your house once a week and yell things into your window. Sound great? Awesome. People aren't anticipating it. They don't know what's supposed to be in those emails. Even when the content is good, a lot of times, Taylor, I'll give myself as an example. When I get into my inbox, I'm often in batch processing mode. Like there's spam emails, there's reminder emails, emails from my kids' school, bills, a couple of newsletters I subscribe to. Oh, here's a message from my mom. I'm going to open that one first. We're in this just sort of grab and go mode so often with the inbox that the inbox has now become a challenging place. But it's still valuable if your message is anticipated, expected, and people subscribe to it. So when you talk about owned media is contrasted with, say, paid media, which we're all familiar with, Google ads, Facebook ads, and so on. It's contrasted with rented media. That could be social networks. I'm sure we're all very familiar with the fact that every social network goes through this. I found a fascinating article, Taylor, that I'll forward to you. It was in Wired magazine a couple of months ago, and it basically talked about how every social network goes through this evolution. They start out optimizing for the user experience. And we were all on Facebook. Some of us were on MySpace before Facebook. I might be dating myself. A lot of us eventually migrated from Facebook to Instagram, didn't we? Because what the vendor will do is after they get a critical mass of users, then they start to optimize for advertisers. The users become the product. And so you start to get less organic reach. This is happening on LinkedIn right now as we speak. A lot of us are seeing our organic reach drop precipitously because LinkedIn wants us to pay ads in order to reach our own followers. And so it's really important for us we have to continue to play in these shared spaces, these communal watering holes, but we need a deep platforming strategy. You need to give people a reason. Once they found you on LinkedIn and they like your content, you love GTM news, oh, wait till you sign up for the newsletter and see what else Taylor has for you. You have to give them a reason to say, I want Taylor showing up in my inbox, and I'm going to look out for that. Like, is that did his email come yet? There it is. Cool. I'm going to set some time aside. It's almost like how we set time aside in the evenings to binge our favorite show on Netflix. Like, we're all pressed for time, but somehow we managed to watch hours and hours and hours of that. I saw some marketers talking about Love is Blind, one of these dating shows on Netflix, just yesterday on LinkedIn. So we make time for the stuff that we find entertaining, insightful, and remarkable. That's the new bar. So and I want to get your take on this, Taylor. The bar for B2B content used to be informational. How to, SEO, like, I'm going to type, how do I get the answer? How do I build a rabbit hutch? Enter. It gives me the answer. Awesome. And then the idea was that, let's say Taylor provided me that information. That was so helpful. I want to stay close to Taylor to get more helpful information. Well, now, how to information is so commoditized. And then you add AI, ChatGPT on top of that. Information is no longer table stakes. Now, in addition to being informational, you've got to be insightful. So give them the aha moments. You've got to be entertaining. It doesn't always mean being funny, but we're all emotional beings. So find a way to connect with me. And then ideally, you're also remarkable. Remarkable literally means the experience was so compelling, so visceral, I want to remark about it, talk about it to somebody else. That's the new bar for B2B content.
I love it. Couldn't agree more. A side note, how are you doing on time? I can go for a few more minutes. I know we're about up.
Yeah, I'm good on time. I don't have a meeting after this yet.
Awesome. Great. Thanks. Because I think I would love for us to dive a couple more minutes into this because I think it's really interesting. Definitely. And I've seen a lot of this. I think in general. So yeah, back to the nurturing, just to kind of highlight on that.
Yes.
I have this concept of subscription-based MQLs. And it kind of ties into that idea of you're like, hey, these are folks that are expecting to receive additional content from you. A white paper, an ebook, whatever. It's a one-time. They're not expecting to receive any more information from you. There's no commitment to receive any more information from you. Yes. A series, a newsletter, a podcast, all those things. There's expectation of receiving more content, right? And so I think that's what you're hitting at as far as when people aren't expecting to receive any more content when they give you your email address, and yet we still send them content. And so there's a misalignment on expectations. And I think in general, also what you're talking about too, as far as I love that idea of being, remarkable and entertaining and insightful is really about exceeding the buyer's expectations. I think the buyer's expectations are like are pretty low, but they've only gone higher, and we haven't matched it, right? Like we've just continued to do previous taxes. When you're talking about, I always give these stories of my nieces and nephews. I don't have any kids myself. We hope to have some down the road, but my nieces and nephews, right? Like my 5-year-old niece Maggie, 6-year-old niece Maggie, she talks about how like the other day she comes in, she's like, we ordered some new shoes and I have to wait 2 days for my new shoes to come. And she's just like so upset about having to wait 2 days.
Amazon, you've ruined everything.
Exactly. And then my another story, my nephew Jack is like on his parents' phone, and he comes into the room and he's like, Amazon is 11 stops away. And he's like waiting. He's watching
Oh
the
my
truck.
good.
He's watching the truck
Whoa,
come,
that's
and
a
he's like, it's
thing.
11. He's 11
Oh my
stops away. And I'm like,
gosh.
I remember having these moments of like, maybe, boomers, Gen X, millennials maybe aren't quite there as far as expectations, but definitely Gen Z are and younger as far as the, instant gratification, having things quickly. So just in general, I think that's why we see like product-led growth. That's why we see, really insightful content, all these different movements in the B2B world, because the buyers' expectations have changed. And they want things, they want things now, and they want things on their level when they want it, right? True. And so I think when it comes to content, and engaging folks, and in general nurturing, I think also too, I think about this idea of, who do we think we are when we think we can create the perfect buyer's journey? Wow. Like when you can create a nurture sequence that's exactly going to hit them right where they're at and just convert them. And, I think with lots of data, I think we've gotten this like, this God syndrome where we can like create this perfect buyer's journey. And B2C, there's some of that because the buyer's journey is so much shorter, and it's shorter. It's shorter, and it's maybe more emotional in some ways. I think B2B is still super emotional, and there's so much at stake in their job, their careers when they're making a buying decision. Yeah. But the buyers, B2C side, I think we've gotten the performance marketing and getting that quick, and using data to be able to reverse engineer. Yes. And honestly, especially if you're an enterprise B2B, or once you get to the really complex sales cycles, I've never seen one model that could predict like, oh, if you hit these 12 people at these certain times, and so I think it doesn't work. People are so much more complex than that. Complex that. Yes. I think we have to go back to what you're talking about, which is how do we invest in folks? How do we build out relationships? How do we give so much value that when they are ready, or when you have built that relationship with them, they're willing to engage. And I think in general, I think there's so much at play in all of this, but the instant gratification, the buyers, expectations have changed, and there's so much noise. And who do we think we are that we can create this amazing? I love that. We can reverse engineer these super complex journeys, because I don't think we ever could. I think that marketing automation was a farce because it gave us. We had all these things, other things at play, and then the marketing automation told us what we wanted to hear. But in all reality, there was all these other things like brand awareness that was happening, or networking, or customer advocacy, or referrals, etc. So I think, and then also when it comes to content, creating content that once again is more subscription based, like what you're talking about, like they're expecting to receive more content from you, so you can build that relationship. And because what I'm seeing with my clients is like it's taking more interactions, it's taking more touches, it's taking longer, and there's just so much noise. So we have to play that long game, invest with great content. I'd love to hear, just in closing, creating remarkable content, engaging content, entertaining content is really hard. Yes, like there's no, and unless you're like. Unless you are like Salesforce that have these massive budgets, how can the rest of us mere mortals that don't, can't pull off, these crazy feats? What are your thoughts? Any takeaways? Any like go-to things? Maybe for like, especially early stage companies, startups. Like any thoughts you have as far as like how do we tap into maybe our own brilliance? And I think about that a lot. Of like each person has their own story. Each person has their own mindset and worldview and perspective that they can share with the world. But yeah, just any thoughts in closing about how do we tap into that? How do we, because it's hard and there's just so much content out there. How do we do that? What are some stepping stones?
I love that question. I'll give you an analogy, Taylor. So I'm still tickled, by the way, of the story of your nephew and nieces. We'll come back to that after the recording. That's so funny. But I'm going to talk about my kids. So my wife and I have two sons. They're 16 and 13 years old. So I've been coaching my younger son in soccer for the past 5 or 6 years. And I've evolved as a coach. I coached my older son for a year as well, his first year in soccer. And when I coached him, unfortunately, in retrospect, I was not a very good coach. I was sort of the disciplinarian, my way or the highway, do these drills. And it was taking the joy out of the whole experience. So eventually I learned and I sort of mellowed, but I've since learned that some of the greatest and most creative soccer players in the world come from Brazil. And the reason there's so many great soccer players coming from Brazil as opposed to other countries is that these kids play soccer at school. They play soccer as soon as they're done with school. Even in the poor neighborhoods, they've got soccer field, these concrete soccer fields. The kids immerse themselves in it. They don't have coaches. They're having fun. What does all that mean? They're experimenting a lot. They're trying and failing a lot. And a lot of the stuff they do won't work, but then they also have these moments of genius that they're like, whoa, that really worked well. And then they run with that. I think we're seeing a lot of these moments of genius on the B2C side. We're seeing a lot of these moments of genius with creators on TikTok, YouTube. We're seeing a lot of these moments of genius in the streaming wars. I mean, the level of creativity, Taylor, coming out of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney, HBO. Why is none of that trickling into B2B? We've got to actually allow some of those influences, I think, to come in, and we have to play with those things. For anyone who might tell you, aha, I've got the elixir, I've got the panacea, this is the exact formula, my 10-step formula, they might be trying to sell you something. I think in reality, we need to hold on to those first principles, like Taylor's dad, right? It's about relationships. It's about giving value earnestly with no expectation of receiving. It's about being part of the community. And then on top of that, we can experiment with ways to express the value that we have to give. So one of the ways that I'm expressing my value, for example, and I'm helping companies to do this, I'm inspired by, of all things, reality shows. What in the world? Specifically reality competitions. So, Taylor, did you ever watch any of these shows? Survivor, American Idol, The Apprentice, any of those?
Yep.
These are largely unscripted shows. And yet, Survivor, for example, has, I think they're on season 45.
Wow.
What other franchise do you know that could make 45 times the same concept? They could put out this 45 times and still make millions of dollars. There's something there. And so I think giving ourselves the opportunity to play with these concepts while still trying to service our business objectives, we can't lose sight of that. That's where we're going to find the next home runs. So I'm going to close it with this. Remember how we kind of beat up on email nurturing a little bit, but I'm starting to tell some of my clients, the intent behind email nurturing is not all bad. You're trying to actually provide real value to people whom you can actually help. The knock on it is that they didn't ask for that. They didn't ask for it. What if we could nurture in public? Instead of nurturing almost like in this dark, seedy alley where it's like, hey, want some emails? You want some emails? No, close your trench coat. I don't want your emails, right? Instead of doing it that way, what if we took that valuable content and we nurtured on social networks? What if instead of having a unidirectional nurturing where it's like, trust me, this is good for you, what if we open it up and created an omnidirectional experience where people, your prospects got to learn from you, compete against each other, network with each other? These are the types of things we can play with to find that next level of remarkability, but it's never divorced from our ultimate business objectives.
Oh, I love that. That's super cool. And I really want to have a follow-up conversation with you, whether on the show or separately around the reality shows, because I think that's fascinating because I think it creates, there's so much, especially in the B2B world, it's so, I mean, you see like on TikTok or any of the short form YouTube Shorts, etc., Instagram Reels. The ones that usually the videos that do the best are the ones that are the least edited, the most transparent. Because in this world, we want transparency, right? Especially with the internet, there's this. You can kind of hide behind editing and with AI, oh my gosh, with AI, transparency is going to be like the number one thing, right?
Oh my gosh, you're right.
So
you're right.
The unedited, the like stripped back, here's us, whatever it is, with the ums and the ahs, and even with this show, I do virtually no editing because I want it to be like they're just like hanging out with us, right? Because so much of it is just so, especially in the B2B world, we want to make it professional and we lose out on the human element, the transparency element. So I'll have to follow up with you on that, and super interesting. And then the nurturing in public, that's a cool concept too, especially with communities like social selling, to be able to connect with people one-on-one. There's some cool ideas there. So I'm excited to follow you. How can folks follow you online to kind of keep up with your ideas, connect with you maybe for consulting or services?
Yeah, so Taylor, I think LinkedIn is probably the best place to connect with me. I'm on there every day, much to the chagrin of my wife. But that's actually the only social network that I use now.
Cool.
I'm off Facebook. I don't really use Instagram anymore. I hope to jump onto TikTok at some point, but for now, LinkedIn is sort of the central hub. So yeah, hit me up on there. I'd love to talk shop about marketing, about soccer, or about Amazon delivery trucks.
I love it. That sounds great. I'll put your links in the show notes. And thanks again for coming on. Great meeting you. We'll definitely have to continue talking and maybe have you back on the show. So really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening. Be sure to check out next week's episode, and we'll catch you later.